Yesterday, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin showed up at Congress, and he was protested during his speech, as pretty much everybody is who comes to Congress to talk about anything touching on the Israel-Gaza war. He was accused of facilitating genocide, and so after the protesters left, Senator Tom Cotton engaged him in a bit of a back and forth about whether or not there is a genocide going on and whether or not the U.S. and Israel are affecting it there. Let's listen to his response.
Secretary Austin, thank you for acknowledging in response to Senator Wicker that Hamas committed war crimes on October 7th and has been committing them every day since by using human shields. I want to address what the protesters raised earlier. Is Israel committing genocide in Gaza?
Senator Cotton, we don't have any evidence of genocide being created.
So that's a no. Israel's not committing genocide in Gaza.
We don't have evidence of that, to
Thank
my
you.
knowledge. Yeah.
What do you make of the, he could say yes. He could say the ICJ has said there's a plausible case for genocide. He could say no. Instead, he said, we don't have evidence for it. What do you make of that?
He said, we don't have evidence for it. And then he also said there's, quote, no question that there have been, quote, far too many civilian casualties throughout the Israel-Hamas war, and that he has stressed to Yoav Gallant that Israel's military must protect civilians. So my basic takeaway of this is it's super characteristic of the Biden administration's attempt to have it both ways, right? Like they want to be citing international law in one case and then shirking it in another. And I know a lot of people are familiar with the definition of genocide at this point, the UN accepted definition, the ICC definition. I'm just going to read it again because I think it's worth talking about in the context of that exchange. So they say genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. So in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. And the reason I bring that up is because, again, it shows how the Biden administration wants to have it both ways on international law. And I think this definition of genocide, which was adopted in the aftermath of World War II, is lacking. I think if you are destroying, quote, in part, a national group, basically anything that Israel did after October 7th would have been categorized as genocide. In whole, a national group, when you have an ethno-state and another ethno-state, there's just no way to have that battle. I'm not saying it's right, the way Israel prosecuted the war. I don't agree with that at all. But I also don't think that this definition of genocide has stood the test of time because it's just, I mean, there's almost no way to prosecute a war after October 7th or to respond after October 7th, which even Hamas expected would happen, and not fall into that definition.
Because it really depends on the definition of the legal definition of in part.
Right.
Because you know Hamas killed several hundred Israeli civilians on October 7th.
Right.
Does that count as in part? Legal experts generally say no, that's not what we mean.
We had one on the show.
In part, right, and he was saying no.
He was saying no because intent.
For October 7th, yeah.
Right, he was saying Hamas may have the intent, but they don't have the capability, whereas Israel has the capability. And that is an understandable distinction. But yes, that question of in part is huge.
And so Saeed Erekat at the State Department asked a really good question, which goes to this, where he did not obviously get a really good answer, but the question is one to sit with, which is there a definition of genocide that would allow Bosnia and Rwanda to apply, but not Palestine?
Oh, that's interesting.
Because the U.S. is comfortable with saying this was a genocide in Rwanda, this was a genocide in Bosnia, the International Court of Justice. Everybody around the world is comfortable.
Even the Uyghurs.
Saying, right. Yeah. Well, the Uyghurs, he also mentioned Rohingya, I believe. Yeah. Because the Uyghurs, you have the cultural destruction, a cultural genocide, but you don't have the kind of mass death that you had in Rwanda with the Rohingya and in Bosnia. And also that one is contested more so than at the international level, Bosnia, Rwanda.
But a lot of people that embrace that one would contest.
Exactly. Absolutely. Like you'd have, you ask Jake Sullivan or Blinken.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
They're going to leap at that one.
100%. It's just so, it's it's typical. I mean, we talked last week about this quote that I came across in Oliver North's memoir recently, where he said, Israel, Britain, they were all selling arms to Iran. The thing that really disappointed me, and I know this is ironic, obviously, coming from Oliver North, but in his memoir, he says the thing that really disappointed me is basically that the United States was like lecturing everybody to not do it while doing it.
Reminds me of this famous Chomsky interview where he's asked, what's the difference between counterterrorism and terrorism? And he says, terrorism is when they do it, and counterterrorism is when we do it. So speaking of terrorism, if we can put up the third element here, Gazans returned to their neighborhood of Khan Yunis over the last couple of days now that the IDF has withdrawn to find it unrecognizable. The Associated Press lead says, stunned Palestinians found their home city unrecognizable Monday as they filtered in to salvage what they could from the vast destruction left by Israeli troops who withdrew from southern Gaza's Khan Yunis a day earlier after months of fighting and bombardment. And the scenes are utterly dystopian. And you don't know, how many people are still buried under this rubble. Families who've returned back can't even kind of figure out which block is theirs anymore because it's just so completely flattened and rubble strewn. The reporter sees them find one plastic red flower that helps them identify, like, our apartment was over here, and the mom puts that in a bag as they're headed back to who knows where. And as the Associated Press points out in this article, this is what Rafah would look like if Netanyahu moves forward with that coming invasion. And he has said they now have a date. That it's going to happen. There's been reports that when the Israelis and the Americans met, the Israelis suggested that they're going to buy tents, hundreds of thousands, tents for hundreds of thousands of people that they're going to move kind of somewhere else.
That they've already bought 40,000.
And they're already trying to purchase 40,000. And the Americans asked, well, okay, that's one thing, but you've got what about food? What about sewage treatment? What about the water? Like, what about the other things that 1.3 million people would need to survive? And that was kind of brushed off. Going to the question of whether or not there's any evidence of genocide, it's one thing to say that we haven't come to a final conclusion that there 100% certainty that genocide is happening. As Lloyd Austin said, to say there's no evidence denies the actual evidence that we do have on the ground. And one of those, and we can go to this next element, is before the CNN put together an interesting investigation into the Flour Massacre of late February. This was one of the turning points, I think, for a lot of global opinion. The U.S. had purchased enough flour to feed millions, to create millions of meals, and for about a month, Israel was keeping this flour out, not letting it into Gaza. Finally, a Connecticut-based kind of charity was able to contract with a couple trucks and work with the IDF, which escorted it in with tanks. And the very first day that this flour that had been waiting outside for so long came in, the IDF starts opening fire. And this is what the CNN investigation finds. The IDF initially said, actually, we never fired, and then later said we fired warning shots, and then they said we fired at quote-unquote suspects. CNN has obtained a bunch of different videos from Palestinians who were there, who were filming at the time that this happened, that show that their timeline is a lie, that they started firing at people who were at the checkpoint. And to me, if you add everything else together, the fact that they had been keeping this out for so long and had only let it in under intense pressure, and then you learn from this reporting that they did open fire on people waiting for them, and then did lie about it, and it did then lead to what they wanted, which was the rest of the flour not getting in, which then did lead to what they also have said publicly that they wanted, which is depriving Palestinians of food. It's kind of one more deliberate act. And so that's why I say that there is evidence. Whether or not Lloyd Austin wants to say it's conclusive evidence is a different question, but there's evidence.
But this is Netanyahu's version of the Biden problem, in that he has people saying, yes, use food as a weapon of war. In what case throughout human history has food not been used as a weapon of war? In what case throughout human history are people feeding the nation that they are at war with? Well, it's kind of what we decided to do after the horrors of World War II. It's kind of how everyone sort of came to the table and said, you can't let that happen again. So if you agreed to those standards of war, then yes. But there are people in Netanyahu's right saying, why are we doing this? This food is going to be used to bolster the people who are trying to kill us. And so Netanyahu, again, has to kind of try and have it both ways and not say outright that there's a position in the Israeli government, or there are factions in the Israeli government that don't want to feed Palestinians because it's not conducive to flattening Gaza. It's not conducive to their definition of winning the war, which is still, by the way, completely unclear. The Biden administration, which to a point that you and Crystal and Sagar often make, is essential to the prosecution of this war from Israel's position, is not even cued in on what the date is. Netanyahu is not telling them the date of this invasion of Rafah, probably because of leaking concerns, intelligence sharing concerns, but that just tells you how fraught the relationship is right now.
Or if it even exists, or if it's a bluff. Throughout the week,
exactly.
Hamas reported earlier this week on its various public channels that in one day, in 3 different engagements, at least 13 IDF soldiers had been killed in combat. Yesterday, they posted some video confirming that had in fact happened. These kind of setbacks are lining up with the IDF announcing that it's withdrawing from these significant areas of southern Gaza. So in some ways, it might just be public-facing bluster from Netanyahu. That actually a ground invasion is not something that the IDF thinks is kind of advantageous at this point, when it's also continuing to threaten and be threatened by Hezbollah up in the north. Plus, we have waiting in the wings the Iranian response to Israel's attack on the Iranian consulate in Damascus, which was a massive breaking of international norms.
Hey, if you liked that video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Breaking Points.
If you want to see the rest of Counterpoints, go to breakingpoints.com to become a premium member and get the full uncut show every morning in your inbox and on Spotify.
Help us build independent news and get the full show every morning at breakingpoints.com.